Okay, picture this. You're walking through an ancient, completely crumbling settlement in the dead of night. The wind is howling through the remains of these old stone houses, and even though it is absolutely dead silent, you just get this creeping feeling that you're being watched. Well, welcome to our latest explainer. Today we're taking a really deep dive into the legendary abandonment of Kuldhara. It is, without a doubt, India's most notorious ghost village.
And that brings us to the massive question at the center of all this. Can 80,000 people literally just vanish overnight, leaving absolutely zero trace behind? Okay, let's dive into this and try to separate the really terrifying supernatural myths from the equally fascinating and honestly completely grounded historical facts.
Section 1. Mysterious Ghost Village, Kuldhara. To really get a grip on this mystery, we first need to look at what this place actually is today. Kuldhara isn't just some small empty field, you know. It's located just 17 kilometers out from the city of Jaisalmer, right out in the harsh Thar Desert, and it contains over 400 perfectly laid out abandoned houses. We're talking entire streets, temples, and wells that are just sitting there. But it has been entirely devoid of human life for 200 years. In fact, if you go visit today as a tourist, you literally have to leave before sunset. Humans are strictly forbidden from staying the night.
And look, there might actually be a very good reason for that rule. Listen to this totally chilling incident from 2013. A team of paranormal investigators went out to the village at 2 a.m. As they were packing up to leave this completely, utterly desolate area, they noticed something that would honestly make my blood run cold. Small handprints, like those of a 4- or 5-year-old child, suddenly started appearing in the dust on the bonnet of their cars right in front of their eyes. And remember, there wasn't a single living human being for miles around. So what exactly happened out there? And who on earth used to live in these houses?
Section 2. Paliwal Brahmins in the Desert.
To figure out what went wrong, we have to go back in time and meet the brilliant people who originally lived here. Kuldhara was founded way back in the 13th century by the Paliwal Brahmins. And honestly, these folks were absolute agricultural geniuses. They came up with this revolutionary water system called the Kajin. Instead of fighting against the dry, arid desert, they used the natural slopes of the hills to funnel the rare monsoon rainwater into very specific areas. Then, over the next few months, that water would slowly seep underground. By wintertime, once the surface water evaporated, what was left behind was this incredibly nutrient-rich, fertile soil that was perfectly primed for planting.
The contrast here is just absolutely mind-blowing. On one hand, you have the barren Thar Desert, where summer temperatures easily soar past 50 degrees Celsius. I mean, it is punishingly hot. But on the other hand, thanks to that cotton system, the people of Kuldhara were miraculously growing 2 whole crops a year, right in the middle of the sand. Plus, because they were sitting perfectly right on the main trade route between Jaisalmer and Sindh, they became expert bankers and traders. At one point, Kuldhara was actually even more prosperous than the city of Jaisalmer itself.
Section 3. The Tyranny of Salim Singh.
Now, massive wealth and prosperity, that usually attracts some pretty dark forces. And here is where the historical villain of our story enters the picture. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer unbelievable scale of the corruption. In the early 1800s, the true power in Jaisalmer was the Diwan, which is essentially the prime minister, a notoriously ruthless guy named Salim Singh. Through just brutal, oppressive taxation, he managed to stash away a personal fortune of 20 million rupees. That's 2 crore rupees, which was an astronomical, almost unthinkable amount of money for that era. He ruled with an absolute iron fist, basically acting as the unchecked tyrant of the whole region.
And eventually, Salim Singh's greedy eyes fell right on Kuldhara. According to the local stories, he became totally captivated by the village chief's daughter and demanded to marry her. He delivered this terrifying ultimatum to the Paliwal Brahmins. He essentially told them, hand over the village chief's daughter on one day, or the entire village will face death.
So, faced with this literally impossible choice, the legend says the Paliwals did the unthinkable. On the night of July 29, 1825, the story goes that all 80,000 inhabitants across 84 Paliwal villages simply packed up and vanished into the darkness. No one saw them leave, not a single soul. But before they did, they supposedly cast a really dark curse on Kuldhara, that no one would ever be able to settle there again.
And you know what? For 200 years, that curse really seems to have held up. It's fueled an entire industry of terrifying paranormal claims. Modern ghost hunters have gone out there and reported some wild anomalies. We're talking sudden temperature drops down to -2 degrees Celsius in a sweltering desert, bizarre electromagnetic field fluctuations that actually seem to react when you ask questions, Entire camera systems just mysteriously crashing whenever they try to review footage of shadowy figures. Even audio equipment capturing clear, disembodied voices. It perfectly sets up this ultimate mystery box, doesn't it?
Section 4. Science and the Earthquake Theory.
All right, let's open up that mystery box and see what science and actual historical forensics have to say. For a really long time, researchers were desperately trying to find a single catastrophic event to explain all these ruins. In 2017, there was a peer-reviewed study that theorized that all the collapsed roofs and broken pillars proved a massive earthquake hit the area. Makes sense, right? Well, actually, scratch that. Look at the rebuttal that came out just a year later in 2018. The earthquake theory completely falls apart the second you scrutinize it. First off, there were literally 0 earthquakes recorded around the time of the migration in 1825. Second, and this is the real kicker, the walls of the houses in Kuldhara are still perfectly aligned today. A devastating quake would have left huge cracks and massive gaps in those walls. So, for sure, an earthquake didn't drive them out.
Section 5. Real reason, drought, and taxes.
This brings us to the grounded, highly logical reasons why the village was actually abandoned. The really crucial takeaway here is that it wasn't just one spooky, supernatural night. It was a cascading domino effect of very real disasters. First, the Kuktik River, which fed their whole amazing water system, dried up because of a dam built upstream. By 1815, their wells were totally emptying out. And without water, farming, it's impossible. Around that same time, their trade routes collapsed because the region was losing its security. And on top of all of this, Salim Singh just kept jacking up his extreme taxes, while local bandits started attacking the villagers and kidnapping women for ransom. Basically, the environment and the economy had totally turned against them. And we don't even have to guess about this, because we actually have the receipts. It was extensively documented at the time. In his 1829 book, a British officer named James Todd directly observed the Paliwal Brahmins living in voluntary exile, specifically to protect themselves from Salim Singh's tyranny. They knew full well that if they stayed or if they tried to return, every single thing they owned would be seized. This wasn't some supernatural vanishing act into the ether. This was a forced migration to escape a brutal oppressor.
And if you still have any doubts, the population data is the absolute final nail in the coffin for that overnight disappearance myth. In the 15th century, Kuldhara housed over 1,500 people. By 1815, which is a full 10 years before that supposed overnight vanishing, the population had already been cut in half to just 800 people because the wells were drying up. And this brilliantly illustrates the truth. Historical records show that in 1890, decades after the mass exodus was supposed to have happened, 37 people were actually still living there. The population didn't vanish in a day. It dropped gradually over decades as families slowly left to seek a better life somewhere else.
Section 6. The Treasure Behind the Rumors. So, that leaves us with one really glaring question, doesn't it? If they just slowly migrated away because of drought and crazy high taxes, why do so many people today actively believe and spread the idea that the village is haunted? Well, part of the answer is literally all in our heads. It's this psychological phenomenon called pareidolia. When people visit a place that they have been heavily conditioned to believe is haunted, they suffer from confirmation bias. Your brain actively starts searching for familiar patterns where absolutely none exist. The howling desert wind suddenly sounds exactly like a screaming ghost. A normal shadow stretching across an ancient stone wall? Your brain tells you it's a supernatural entity. But there is another, much more physical reason for all the weird disturbances out there. Up until the 1990s, almost nobody went out to visit Kuldhara. But there was this widespread local rumor that the extremely wealthy Paliwals had buried all their gold and treasure under the floors of their homes before they fled. And in 1998, a local watchman actually caught foreign treasure hunters out in the ruins. They were using metal detectors to dig up actual real-life gold and silver coins from the dirt. They were arrested on the spot, and the treasure they recovered is literally still sitting in police custody today.
Which brings us to the ultimate, incredibly satisfying twist of this whole explainer. The ghosts of Kuldhara, they weren't conjured up by some centuries-old dark curse. They were entirely manufactured by human greed. Thieves and treasure hunters deliberately amplified and spread these terrifying supernatural stories just to scare the locals and keep them as far away from the village at night as possible. I mean, think about it. It was the absolute perfect cover story for their illegal midnight digging.
So we're left with this final thought to chew on. The true legacy of Kuldhara isn't some eerie curse or unexplained handprints on a car bonnet. It's the incredibly inspiring story of a resilient, brilliant community that conquered the harshest desert on Earth, only to be tragically driven out by the cruelty of a tyrant and the collapse of their environment. Next time you hear a spooky ghost story, maybe take a step back and ask yourself, what is the real, grounded human history hiding in the shadows here? Should we really be looking for ghosts in Kuldhara, or should we be saluting the civilization that managed to grow gold in the desert sand? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, keep questioning.